She was already running when the doors of Desak Financial Tower slid open that Monday morning. Not physically, not the kind of running that draws attention or makes heels click too loudly against polished marble floors. Zarelle Adebayo ran the way people run when they have taught themselves to disappear, quietly, efficiently, with every muscle in her body trained toward invisibility. Her ID badge slapped against her chest as she reached the elevator bank. She pressed the button, waited, kept her eyes low the way she always did, the way she had done every single morning for 2 years in this city, in this building, on this floor where nobody truly saw her, and she preferred it that way. The elevator opened. She stepped in. 3 other employees filed in behind her. 2 men speaking rapid Korean about a quarterly projection, 1 woman staring at her phone. Nobody looked at Zarelle. Nobody ever did, and that was the entire point. She exhaled slowly as the elevator climbed. Monday morning in Seoul. An African woman who had spent 2 years hiding inside a corporate office was about to catch the attention of the most powerful billionaire in the building, and the moment he noticed her, her quiet life would be over. But she didn't know that yet. She stood in that elevator with her laptop bag on her shoulder and a container of jollof rice she had packed the night before, and thought about nothing except making it to her desk without incident. That was her daily goal. Not excellence, not recognition, just invisibility. To everyone at Desak Financial Tower, Zarelle Adebayo was unremarkable. She wore muted colors, navy, charcoal, gray. She kept her natural hair pressed flat under a low bun that said nothing about who she was. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then she answered in short, clean sentences that ended conversations rather than extended them. She never ate lunch in the communal kitchen, never joined the Friday after-work gatherings at the Pokjang Matcha 2 blocks from the office, never let anyone get close enough to ask where she was really from or what she did on weekends or whether she had family somewhere. She was a ghost, and she had worked very hard to become one. Her official title was Junior Financial Analyst, Team B, 7th floor. Her actual function was to produce the most consistently accurate market reports in the entire department, reports that her section head, Desak, submitted every week under his own name without so much as acknowledging she existed. She knew it. She said nothing, because attention was dangerous, because the moment you made yourself visible, people started asking questions, and questions led to answers, and answers led to a past she had traveled 6,000 kilometers to leave behind. The elevator opened on the 7th floor. She stepped out. She didn't see the man at the far end of the corridor, the one in the charcoal suit who had paused outside the glass-walled conference room, whose assistant was speaking quietly into his ear, whose eyes swept the hallway the way a man sweeps a room when he has spent his entire life ensuring nothing escapes his notice. She didn't see him looking. She turned left toward her cubicle and sat down and opened her laptop and began her morning. If you've ever worked somewhere you were completely invisible, somewhere your talent fed someone else's name, then you already understand something about Zarelle before she even speaks her first word. Before we go further, if you love emotional, cinematic Afro-Korean stories like this one, take 2 seconds right now to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps this community grow, and I promise you, this story is about to go places that will leave you completely breathless. Now, to understand why Zarelle Adebayo was hiding in a corporate cubicle in Seoul, you have to go back 2 years. You have to go back to Lagos. You have to go back to the night 22,000 people were screaming her name. She was 26 years old, and she owned every stage she walked onto. That was not arrogance, it was simply fact. From the time she was 14 and sang at her grandmother's church in Ibadan, and the entire congregation went silent mid-worship, something in Zarelle's voice had the quality of a hand reaching directly into the human chest and rearranging whatever it found there. She called it Afro-Soul. It was Yoruba rhythm married to something deeper, something that didn't have a name in any language she spoke. Her grandmother, Mama Ifedara, used to say, "That voice is not yours, Zarelle. God only lent it to you. Treat it like borrowed gold." By 23, she had a record deal. By 25, she was selling out venues across West Africa and parts of Europe. By 26 and 4 months, she had lost everything. Not to a scandal, not to a mistake of her own making, to love, to trust, to the specific devastating blindness that happens when you hand your entire world to someone and believe with your whole heart that they will protect it. His name was Emeka, her manager, her fiancé, the man who held her contracts, her earnings, her brand partnerships, and her future in his hands, and who, over the course of 18 months, had been systematically siphoning her money, signing her name to agreements she never saw, and building a parallel empire from the foundation of everything she had worked for. When it finally collapsed, it collapsed completely. The lawsuits, the frozen accounts, the whisper campaign that turned the industry against her before she even understood what had happened, the photographs someone leaked, out of context, reframed, weaponized, the way her name became not a name that opened doors, but a name that closed them. She remembered sitting in her apartment in Lagos on the last night before she left. The city was loud outside her window, the way Lagos is always loud, full of life and noise and motion that never stops for anyone's grief. She sat on the floor beside her bed. She did not cry. She had already finished crying 3 weeks earlier and decided that tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. She had one carry-on suitcase, a passport, enough money to survive for 4 months if she was careful. She chose Seoul because she had done a single collaboration performance there 2 years earlier and remembered it as a city that moved fast and asked few personal questions, a city where she could be foreign without being exceptional about it, a city where she could begin as a nobody and nobody would know she had once been somebody. She landed at Incheon Airport on a Tuesday morning in February. It was the coldest she had ever been in her life. She stood outside the arrivals terminal with her carry-on bag and looked at the pale winter sky over Seoul and said quietly to nobody, "Okay, start again." And she did. Starting again, it turned out, looked nothing like starting over in the movies. There was no montage, no uplifting soundtrack, no slow-motion shot of a determined woman walking through neon-lit streets with fire in her eyes. There was only the grinding, unglamorous reality of building a life from scratch in a country whose language she was still learning, whose customs she was still navigating, and whose winters felt like a personal punishment from God. She found a room in a goshiwan in Mapo-gu during her first week, a room so small that when she sat on the bed and stretched her arms, her fingertips nearly touched both walls. She ate cheap kimbap from the convenience store on the corner and studied Korean on her phone and told herself that discomfort was temporary, that discipline was the bridge between surviving and living. She got her first job at a small trading company in Yeouido, data entry mostly, dull work that paid just enough to upgrade her housing situation 3 months later. She moved into a slightly larger rooftop apartment in Mapo. She bought a second-hand space heater. She enrolled in Korean language classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She did not sing, not once, not even alone. She would catch herself sometimes, humming while she washed dishes, the beginning of a melody rising in her throat the way water rises before it boils, and she would stop it, swallow it back down, press her lips together and turn up the television and drown it out. Music had been the center of her life, and the center had collapsed, and she had decided, without making a formal decision, the way you decide some things, which is simply by surviving in a direction, that the center was not safe anymore. She applied to Daesung Financial on a Thursday afternoon without expecting much. She got a call back on Monday. By the following month, she was a junior financial analyst on the 7th floor with a work visa, a proper salary, and a cubicle beside a window that looked out over the Han River on clear days. She dressed quietly, she worked efficiently, she kept her head down so completely that for the first 3 months, the colleague directly across from her thought her name was Zara, and she never corrected him. This was the life she had built. Small, safe, predictable. And it would have continued exactly like that, invisible, protected, contained, except for one thing. Hey Leora. Park Hey Leora arrived on the 7th floor as a contract employee in Zarelle's 6th month at Desak, assigned to document a corporate rebrand campaign for the company's internal media. She was 28 years old, carried a camera like most people carry their personalities, openly, constantly pointed at everything, and possessed the particular quality that made Zarelle deeply uncomfortable from the first moment they met. She paid attention. Not the polite, performative attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, real attention, the kind that landed on you and stayed. "You're the analyst who did the Q3 Southeast Asia report," Leora said on maybe her 3rd day in the office, setting her camera bag down beside Zarelle's desk without asking permission. "I read it. It was brilliant. Desak presented it like it was his, but I cross-referenced the metadata on the file." She tilted her head. "It was yours." Zarelle looked up slowly. "Can I help you with something?" "Not yet," Leora said cheerfully, and picked up her camera bag and walked away. That was how it started. Leora was the kind of person who treated social resistance as a mild inconvenience rather than a boundary, and she applied this philosophy specifically and persistently to Zarelle. She appeared at Zarelle's desk with coffee she hadn't asked for. She sat beside her in the cafeteria and narrated observations about the office with such specific, accurate wit that Zarelle found herself swallowing smiles against her will. She was warm the way certain people are warm, not soft but generous, not naive but determined to find the good thing in every situation and drag it into the light regardless of whether the situation consented. Within 6 weeks, she was the closest thing Zarelle had to a friend in Seoul, which Zarelle both valued and found quietly terrifying. "You work too hard and live too small," Leora told her one evening as they walked back from a convenience store run at 9:30 at night. "You eat the same lunch every day, you take the same route to work, you never look up when you walk." She paused. "What are you afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of anything. I'm organized." "Zarelle," Leora stopped walking and turned to face her. "I've been a photographer for 6 years. I know what it looks like when someone is hiding inside their own life. It looks exactly like you." Zarelle said nothing, which was in its own way an answer. She didn't talk about Lagos. She didn't talk about the music. When Leora asked, directly or indirectly, she redirected with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed evasion until it became reflex. And Leora, to her credit, did not push beyond what was offered. She simply stayed close, present, patient, the way good people do when they have decided someone is worth waiting for. It was 3 weeks after that conversation, a Tuesday evening in October when the Seoul autumn had turned sharp and golden, that Leora heard it. She had come by Zarelle's apartment unannounced, as she occasionally did, to drop off a camera strap she had borrowed. She knocked. No answer. She tried the door. Zarelle had given her a spare key after the 3rd time Leora had appeared with food she refused to eat alone, and let herself in. Zarelle was in the kitchen, back turned, washing the rice she was preparing for dinner. And she was humming. Not casually, not the absent, tuneless kind of humming people do without thinking. She was humming something real, a melody that moved in the particular way only fully formed things move, with intention and structure and a kind of aching underneath it that made the small kitchen feel suddenly enormous. Leora stood in the doorway and did not breathe. The sound settled over the room like something sacred, like something that had no business existing in a rooftop apartment above a chicken skewer shop in Mapo. It was the kind of sound that made you want to call people you had stopped talking to. It was the kind of sound that reminded you, without asking permission, that beauty was still real. Zarelle turned and saw her. The humming stopped instantly. "Leora!" "Don't." Leora's voice came out low, almost reverent. "Don't you dare apologize for that." Zarelle set down the pot, dried her hands on the kitchen cloth. Her face had gone carefully neutral, the expression she wore when something was getting too close to something she had promised to protect. "It's nothing," she said. "I was just—" "Leora." Leora crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and stood directly in front of her. Her eyes were wide and entirely serious. What was that? A long silence. Then Zarelle said, very quietly, "It's just a song I used to know." She didn't tell Leora everything that night. She told her enough. Enough for Leora to sit across from her at the small kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she had made herself without asking, and listen without interrupting, and not say anything for a long time after Zarelle finished speaking. The Lagos years, the music, Emeka, the collapse. She said it all in the flat, careful tone of someone recounting events that happened to a different person, because that was the only way she had found to say it at all. The moment she let emotion into the words stopped coming, so she kept her voice even and her hands still, and she looked at a point just past Leora's shoulder, and she talked. When she finished, Leora was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, "He took everything." "Yes. And you let him." Zarelle looked at her. It's more complicated than—" "I know it's complicated," Leora said. "I'm not judging you. I'm just saying he took everything, and then you took yourself away too. You finished what he started." The words landed with the particular weight of true things said by people who care enough to say them. Zarelle looked back down at her tea. "I didn't want to be found." "I know." Leora reached across the table and covered Zarelle's hand with hers. "But that voice, Zarelle, that thing I heard in this kitchen tonight, you cannot bury that. You can try. You can spend the rest of your life inside a cubicle in a building where nobody knows your name, but it will find a way out. Things like that always do." Zarelle pulled her hand back gently. "Can we talk about something else?" Leora looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her tea and leaned back in her chair and said, "Fine, tell me about the Q3 report." And Zarelle, grateful for solid ground, talked about the Q3 report. But the truth was, the Q3 report was its own source of quiet rage, the kind of rage she had trained herself to package very small and store somewhere she didn't have to look at it every day. Yoon Desak was 34 years old and had held the position of senior analyst team lead for 3 years on the strength of a reputation he had built almost entirely from the work of the people beneath him. He was the kind of man who wore confidence like a tailored suit, perfectly fitted, completely borrowed. He was charming in meetings, he was strategic with credit. He had a gift for taking the finished work of quieter, more talented people and presenting it to senior leadership in a way that made it seem effortless and entirely his own. He had identified Zarelle within her first month. Quiet, foreign, unlikely to make noise. She was, from his perspective, ideal. The first time he submitted her analysis under his name, she had stared at the internal report distribution email for a long time. Her work, her data modeling, her conclusions, his name at the top in bold. She had opened a new email to HR, stared at the blank message field, and then closed it. Because noise was dangerous, because visibility was dangerous, because the fastest way to stay hidden was to let the small injustices pass and save your energy for the larger project of survival. So she said nothing, and so it continued, month after month, report after report. The Southeast Asia Q3 analysis that Leora had spotted, the currency risk projection that had earned Desak a formal commendation from the CFO, the emerging markets brief that had apparently so impressed the chairman's office that it was referenced in a board presentation. Zarelle had written every word of all of it. She knew in some cold and practical part of her mind that this arrangement could not sustain itself forever. Eventually, someone would ask Desak a question his actual intellect couldn't answer. Eventually, the gap between the man presenting the work and the work itself would become visible to someone with eyes sharp enough to notice. She simply planned to be long gone before that happened. What she had not planned for was the company gala. The announcement came on a Wednesday morning, a building-wide email from the office of Chairman Sao Tarian announcing the annual Desak Group Leadership Gala to be held at the Grand Hyatt Seoul the following Friday evening. Attendance was mandatory for all staff above junior associate level. The gala celebrated the company's 40th year. There would be a formal dinner, remarks from senior leadership, and a live performance by a commissioned artist. Zarelle read the email once, wrote the date in her calendar, and planned to attend for exactly 90 minutes, speak to no one beyond the necessary professional minimum, and leave. Simple, clean, manageable. "You're going," Leora said, appearing at her desk 11 minutes after the email went out, already vibrating with the particular energy she reserved for things she had decided were significant. "And you're not wearing that navy thing you wear to everything." "I own several navy things. They all look like camouflage, which I understand is the point, but not Friday. Friday, you're going to look like yourself." "I always look like myself." "Zarelle." Leora put both hands on the desk and leaned forward. "You look like someone who is very good at looking like someone else. There's a difference." Zarelle opened her mouth, closed it, returned her eyes to her screen. "I'll pick you up at 6:30, and Leora walked away before the conversation could be ended. Now, before we get to the gala, and trust me, what happens at that gala is the moment this entire story turns. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do it now. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and if you've ever had someone steal credit for your work the way Desak has been stealing Zarelle's, drop a comment below, because what is coming for this man is deeply, deeply satisfying. It was on the Thursday afternoon before the gala, the evening before everything changed, that Zarelle first saw him. She had left the office early for the first time in recent memory, needing to collect a dress Leora had insisted on selecting for her from a boutique in Gangnam that Zarelle privately considered an unnecessary extravagance. She had found the address, found the shop, collected the garment bag the attendant held out to her with both hands, and turned toward the door when she walked directly into a wall. Except it was not a wall. It was a man. Tall, dark suit, charcoal, perfectly cut, the kind of suit that existed in a category of garment that did not require a brand name because the quality announced itself. He smelled like cedar and something colder. He had the posture of someone who had never once in his life moved aside for another person in a doorway. She bounced off him and grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. The garment bag swung wildly. "I'm so sorry," she said automatically, first in Korean, then in English. He looked down at her. Not rudely, not warmly, simply looked, with the specific measuring quality of a man to whom looking was a form of assessment. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, stepped past her, and was gone. Zarelle stood in the doorway of the boutique and watched him walk to a black car idling at the curb and get in without looking back. She adjusted the garment bag on her shoulder. She thought nothing of it. She went home. The Grand Hyatt Seoul sat above the city like something that had decided long ago it had nothing to prove. Zarelle stood at the entrance on Friday evening in a dress Leora had chosen. Deep burgundy, structured at the shoulders, simple enough to be elegant and striking enough to be noticed, which was precisely the problem. She had argued against it in Leora's apartment while Leora sat on the bed eating chips and refusing to negotiate. "It's too much," Zarelle had said, looking at herself in the mirror. "It's exactly enough," Leora said, "which is what you're afraid of." She had lost the argument. As she was beginning to understand, she always lost arguments with Leora, and now she stood at the entrance of the Grand Hyatt in Burgundy, while colleagues filed past her in their formal wear, and the city glittered below, and she reminded herself, 90 minutes, minimum conversation, clean exit. Leora appeared beside her with 2 glasses of champagne and the expression of someone who had already decided this evening was going to be historic. "You look stunning," she said. "Take the glass and stop looking like you're calculating escape routes." "I'm not calculating escape routes. You looked at 3 exits when we walked in." Zarelle took the champagne. "That's just spatial awareness." Leora laughed, full and genuine, the kind of laugh that turned heads, and linked her arm through Zarelle's and walked them both into the ballroom. It was a beautiful room. Desak Group had not been modest. Round tables dressed in ivory and gold, chandeliers that threw warm light across everything, a string quartet playing something classical in the corner, the kind of event that reminded employees intentionally of the scale of the machine they were part of. Zarelle moved through it the way she moved through everything, carefully, efficiently, occupying as little space as possible. She greeted the colleagues she was required to greet. She answered the questions she was required to answer. She kept the champagne glass in her hand as a prop and drank very little of it. She did not see Tyrion arrive. She felt it, almost, a shift in the room's atmosphere, the way a change in barometric pressure announces itself before rain, a subtle straightening of postures near the entrance, a quieting of certain conversations, the particular alertness that moves through a room when power enters it. But she was not looking in that direction, and so she missed the moment he walked in. What she did not miss was Desak. He found her 40 minutes into the evening, materializing at her elbow with a glass of whiskey and the particular smile he wore when he wanted something, wide, confident, entirely constructed. "Zarelle," he said, in the tone of a man who had convinced himself they were friends, "you look different tonight." "Desak," she said. "I've been meaning to tell you, the emerging markets projection you finished last week, I submitted it this morning." He paused, a beat too deliberate. Senior leadership loved it. She looked at him steadily. "I'm glad it was useful." Something moved behind his eyes, the awareness that she knew, and the confidence that it didn't matter, and the faint enjoyment of that gap. "You're a real asset to the team," he said, and lifted his glass slightly, a toast to nothing, and moved away. Zarelle watched him go. She thought, not much longer. She thought, 90 minutes. She thought, you will not give him the satisfaction of your anger tonight. She found Leora near the photographer's station at the edge of the room and stood beside her and breathed slowly and watched the clock. She did not know that upstairs in the VIP reception room on the mezzanine level, the evening's commissioned performer had just called the events coordinator in a panic. Appendicitis, hospital, impossible to perform. She did not know that this information was currently spreading through the event management team like a small, contained fire, that the coordinator was calling emergency contacts, that the entertainment director was sweating visibly into his tuxedo collar, that within 15 minutes this problem would need a solution, or the formal program, the section of the evening directly observed by Chairman Se Tyrion and the board, would have a gaping, embarrassing hole in the center of it. She did not know any of this. She was looking at the clock and thinking about the subway home when Leora's phone buzzed. Leora read the message. Her head turned slowly toward Zarelle with an expression Zarelle had never seen on her face before, a mixture of calculation and excitement and the specific guilt of someone who is about to do something they know is wrong and decided to do it anyway. "Leora," Zarelle said immediately, "whatever that mask means, no." "I haven't said anything yet." "You don't need to. That mask is a complete sentence." Leora turned her body fully towards her. "The performer for the evening just canceled. They need someone to sing for 20 minutes during the formal program. Yemi from the events team just texted me because she knows I know people in the art circuit and she's desperate." Zarelle stared at her. "Absolutely not." "Leora, no. Leora, no. I don't perform anymore. That is not, no." "It's 20 minutes."
Zarelle said. "One set. These are your colleagues. It's a private corporate event. Nobody is going to be filming. Nobody is going to post anything." "You don't know that." "I know that you have been silent for 2 years," Leora said, and her voice had dropped, lost all its playful quality, become something direct and serious and almost fierce. 2 years, Zarelle. That voice has been locked inside you for 2 years, and I heard it in your kitchen washing rice, and it nearly broke my heart. Not because it was sad, but because it was so alive and it had nowhere to go." Zarelle's jaw was tight. "One set," Leora said quietly. "One set. No name announcement. I'll tell Yemi to introduce you as a guest artist. You walk on, you sing, you walk off. Nobody outside this room ever knows." The silence between them stretched. The string quartet finished their piece. A smattering of applause moved through the room. Zarelle looked at the stage at the far end of the ballroom, empty, waiting, a single microphone stand at its center catching the light. Something moved in her chest, something she had kept very still for a very long time. "One set." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Leora exhaled. "One set. No name. No name. If I walk off that stage and I say it's done, it's done. No argument. No argument. And then, because she was Leora, you're going to be extraordinary." Zarelle handed her the champagne glass, rolled her shoulders back once, slowly, the way she used to do in the wings of every stage she had ever stood in. The muscle memory of that single motion moved through her like electricity through old wiring. She walked towards the stage, and upstairs, on the mezzanine level, Say Tyrion was just settling into his seat at the VIP table when his events director leaned down and murmured that a last-minute replacement artist had been arranged for the performance. Tyrion said nothing, lifted his water glass, looked down at the ballroom below with the patient, slightly bored expression of a man attending an obligation. He did not know that boredom was about to become something else entirely.
She stood in the wings for 40 seconds before they called her. 40 seconds was enough time for doubt to arrive, unpack its bags, and make itself comfortable. It came the way it always came, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small, practical voice of self-preservation that had kept her alive for 2 years in a city that didn't know her name. You don't do this anymore. You made a decision. Walk back out there, find Leora, go home. She stood very still and let the voice finish, let it say everything it had to say. And then she looked down at her hands, steady, both of them, which surprised her, and she thought about her grandmother. Mama Ifadara in the small sitting room in Abadan with her wrapper tied high and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and her Bible open on her lap that she wasn't reading because she was watching 14-year-old Zarelle sing at the small keyboard by the window. The way she had looked, not proud exactly, something deeper than proud, something that looked like recognition. That voice is not yours, Zarelle. God only lent it to you. The events coordinator appeared at her elbow. Young woman, earpiece, clipboard, the controlled panic of someone managing a situation by sheer willpower alone. "We're ready for you. 30 seconds. Zarelle nodded. She did not think about Lagos. She did not think about Emeka. She did not think about the frozen accounts or the whisper campaign or the photographs or the courtroom she had sat in while lawyers argued over the wreckage of her life. She thought about her grandmother's face. She walked out onto the stage. The ballroom was large and warm and filled with the ambient noise of 300 people at the tail end of their second drinks, conversations overlapping, cutlery against china, the low, comfortable hum of a corporate gathering that had loosened slightly with the evening. A few heads turned as she took her position at the microphone. Most did not. She was unannounced, unrecognized, simply a woman in burgundy who had appeared on the stage, and the room gave her approximately the attention it gave any background element of the evening. She adjusted the microphone. She closed her eyes for exactly one breath, and then she opened her mouth and sang the first note. It was not a loud note. That was the thing nobody in that room would be able to fully explain afterward when they tried to describe what happened. It was not a dramatic entrance, not a powerful opening blast designed to command attention. It was a single note, held, searching, the kind of note that exists at the exact boundary between a question and a statement. But something in it, something in the specific quality of that voice, in the way it moved through the air of that ballroom, reached into the noise and stopped it. Not all at once, in a wave. First, the tables nearest the stage, conversations ending mid-sentence, heads turning, eyes finding the stage with the reflexive attention of people who have just heard something they cannot immediately categorize. Then the wave moving outward, the middle tables, the back of the room, the bar area, where 3 executives had been deep in conversation that now evaporated completely. By the time she reached the end of the first verse, the ballroom was silent. 300 people, silent. She sang in Yoruba first, a verse that moved like water over stone, smooth and inevitable, carrying the particular emotional weight of a language built for feeling. Then she shifted seamlessly into Korean, not phonetically memorized syllables, but real Korean, inhabited Korean, the kind that lands differently when a foreign voice speaks it because the tenderness in it is chosen rather than assumed. Then the chorus, and the chorus was neither language. It was something she had written years ago in Lagos at 2 in the morning when she was 24 and still believed the world was essentially generous. And it was the purest thing she had ever made, and she had not sung it in 2 years, and it came out of her now with the force of something that had been held back for too long. A waiter near the kitchen entrance stopped walking. He stood with a tray in both hands and did not move. A woman at table 7 pressed her fingers to her mouth. 2 of the board members who had been reviewing documents on their phones put the phones face down on the table without being aware they had done it. And upstairs on the mezzanine level, So Tyrion set down his water glass. He had been half listening, the way he half listened to most things at events like this, present in body, working in mind, allocating the minimum necessary attention to his surroundings while the larger part of him processed the day's outstanding decisions. He heard the music begin in the peripheral way you hear background sound, registered it as the evening's scheduled entertainment, and returned to his thoughts. And then something in it reached him. He couldn't name what it was. That bothered him slightly. Tyrion was a man who could name most things. He had built an empire on the ability to identify what something was, what it was worth, and what it would become. Language and categorization were tools he trusted. But this did not fit a category. He leaned forward, rested his forearms on the mezzanine railing, and looked down on the stage. The woman in burgundy, back straight, eyes closed now completely inside the music, one hand lifted slightly at her side, not a performance gesture, not calculated, just the body's own response to what the voice was carrying. He watched her. Around him, his table had gone quiet. Even Director Kwan, who had opinions about everything and kept them to himself for no one, had stopped talking. The song moved through its final passage, slower now, the melody dropping into something that felt like the last light of an afternoon, like the specific ache of a beautiful thing ending. He held the final note, let it expand, let it find every corner of that room, and then it was gone. Silence. A full, complete, breathing silence, the kind that happens when a room full of people have been taken somewhere together and needs a moment to return. Then the applause came. It came all at once, like water breaks through when the pressure finally exceeds the structure holding it back.
300 people on their feet, the sound of it enormous and sudden in the high-ceilinged room. And Zarelle stood at the microphone and opened her eyes and looked out at the standing ballroom, and something moved across her face. Not a performance smile, not the polished gratitude of a professional receiving her due, but something raw and involuntary, something that looked almost like grief. Because she had forgotten. In 2 years of silence, she had forgotten what it felt like to give it and have it received. The exchange of it, the specific intimacy of a voice and the people it reaches. She had told herself she was protecting something by being silent. She had not let herself know until this exact moment what the silence had cost her. Upstairs, So Tyrion straightened. He turned to the events director beside him. "Who is she?" The events director was still clapping. He stopped. I'm not certain, Chairman. The scheduled artist canceled this evening. She was arranged as a last-minute replacement. I believe she's," he checked his phone quickly, "a guest of one of the photographer contractors." Tyrion looked back down at the stage. The woman in burgundy, back straight, eyes closed now completely inside the music, head slightly bowed, already retreating back into the composed, contained thing she had been before the music started. "Find out who she is." His voice was quiet, entirely certain. "By morning." She woke up Saturday morning convinced she had made a terrible mistake. The feeling was there before she was fully conscious, sitting on her chest when she opened her eyes, heavy and familiar, the specific weight of having allowed herself to be seen. She lay on her back in the gray morning light of her rooftop apartment and stared at the ceiling and went through it methodically the way she processed all threats, calmly, clinically, cataloging the damage. 300 people had heard her sing. She had used no name. Leora had confirmed no name was announced. It was a private corporate gala, not a public event. The likelihood that anyone in that room had recognized her, an African singer who had disappeared from the industry 2 years ago, was small. The likelihood that anyone had filmed it, despite the no recording policy, was less small, but still manageable. She was probably fine. She sat up, made tea, stood at her window and watched the Saturday morning city move slowly below her, the street vendors setting up, the delivery riders, the elderly man who walked his small dog past her building every morning at exactly 7:45. Normal, ordinary, safe. Her phone buzzed. Leora. "You were magnificent last night. Don't spiral. I know you're spiraling." Then a second message 3 minutes later. "Also, I may have cried. Just so you know, not relevant, stop spiraling." Zarelle put the phone face down on the counter and drank her tea. She spent the weekend doing the things she did every weekend, cleaning the apartment, preparing meals for the week ahead, studying Korean vocabulary she didn't strictly need, but found useful to practice. She did not think about the gala. She did not think about the standing ovation or the silence that had preceded it, or the things she had felt at the microphone that she was not ready to name. She was fine. By Sunday evening, she believed it. By Monday morning, she had almost convinced herself the gala had been a small anomaly, a single unguarded moment that had passed without consequence, leaving everything intact. She was wrong. She knew it the moment she stepped off the elevator on the 7th floor. The atmosphere was different. Not dramatically, not the obvious electric difference of a room where something loud has happened. This was subtler. The particular quality of an office where information has been moving through it all morning before the main players arrived. 2 colleagues near the printer who stopped talking when she walked past. Desak's assistant, who usually ignored her entirely, watching her with an expression that mixed curiosity with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Zarelle walked to her desk, sat down, opened her laptop. 8 minutes later, her desk phone rang. She looked at the display. Chairman's office, 38th floor. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Miss Adebayo?" The voice was a woman's, measured, professional, the cadence of someone who managed the schedule of a very important person and had developed the communication style of that schedule. "Chairman So Tyrion requests your presence on the 38th floor at 9:15. Please bring your current project portfolio." a pause of exactly the length it took Zarelle to process that sentence. May I ask what this is regarding? The chairman will explain when you arrive. Another pause, and then, slightly warmer, Please don't be late, Miss Adebayo. He has a 10 o'clock board call. The line went quiet. Zarelle set the receiver down slowly. She sat for a moment with both hands flat on her desk, then opened her bottom drawer and retrieved her portfolio folder, the one containing the formal versions of the analyses and projections she had produced over the past 2 years, documents she kept for herself, because keeping them was the only acknowledgement of the work she had done, and she stood up and straightened her jacket. She did not allow herself to speculate. Speculation without information was just anxiety wearing a productive disguise. She would go up, she would listen, she would respond to whatever this was with the same composure she brought to everything. She walked to the elevator bank. Behind her, she did not see Desak watching from the glass-walled meeting room, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping once against the table before he reached for his phone. The 38th floor was a different world. Not ostentatiously different. It was not the kind of wealth that announced itself in gold fixtures and marble everything. It was the quieter, more authoritative difference of a space where every element had been chosen with complete precision and zero compromise. Deep charcoal walls, dark wood, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but contained, large windows that made Seoul look like something that existed for the building's consideration rather than the other way around. The assistant who met her at the elevator, a composed young man named Jae-won, whose efficiency was almost architectural, walked her to a set of double doors at the end of a corridor and knocked twice and opened them. Miss Adebayo, Chairman? Tae-yeon was standing at the window when she entered, not behind his desk, not seated in one of the 2 chairs arranged near the low table to his right, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with his back partially to her, looking out at the city with the stillness of a man who was never not thinking. He turned when she entered. This was the first time she saw his face clearly. At the boutique in Gangnam, she had registered him in the fragmented, adrenaline-compressed way you register anything you walk into. Tall, dark suit, cold posture. Now she saw him properly. He was younger than she expected for a man whose name occupied the building they were standing in. Early 30s, the kind of face that carried its own weather, angular and still, with eyes that were doing what she recognized from the boutique doorway as assessment. Not rude, not intrusive, simply evaluating. He crossed to the seating area and gestured towards the chair across from him. "Sit down, Miss Adebayo." She sat, placed her portfolio folder on her knee, kept her back straight and her face composed, and waited. He sat across from her, leaned back slightly, looked at her with the unhurried quality of a man who had never once in his life felt the need to fill silence with noise. "You sang at the Gala Friday evening." It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "You work on the 7th floor, junior analyst, Team B." "Yes." "You've been with the company for 2 years?" 23 months. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but the acknowledgement of precision. 23 months, he repeated, during which time you produced, according to the portfolio request I made to the records office this morning, 14 major analytical reports, 6 risk assessments, and 3 emerging markets projections, all submitted under Yoon Desak's name. The room was very quiet. Zarelle held his gaze. "I'm a junior analyst," she said carefully. "Reports go through senior review before—" "Miss Adebayo," his voice was not unkind. It was simply exact. "I've read your work. I've also read Desak's work. They are not the same quality. The gap between them is not a matter of interpretation." He paused. "You've been functioning as his ghostwriter for almost 2 years." She said nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Effective today, you will be reassigned. You will work directly under my office on a strategic analysis project I will brief you on this afternoon." He straightened slightly. "Your compensation will be adjusted accordingly. Jae-won will handle the paperwork." Zarelle stared at him. He stopped, started again. "Chairman, with respect, I don't understand why." Because talent that is being stolen is talent being wasted, he said simply, and I don't tolerate waste in my company. He stood. The meeting apparently was concluded. Zarelle stood too automatically. One more thing, he said as he moved back towards the window. He said it without turning around, almost as an afterthought, but she would think later that nothing this man said was ever an afterthought. The song you sang on Friday, was that yours? A beat of silence. Yes, she said quietly. He nodded once, still looking at the city. It showed, he said.
The news of Zarelle's reassignment reached the 7th floor before she did. She stepped off the elevator to find the office wearing the particular silence of a space where everyone has just stopped pretending to work. Eyes moved to her and away. Keyboards resumed typing with slightly too much deliberateness. The performance of people who had been talking and had suddenly found reasons not to be. She walked to her desk, began clearing her personal items into a small bag with the calm efficiency of someone who had packed up and moved on before and knew exactly how to do it without sentiment. Desak appeared at the entrance of his office. He was smiling, that constructed smile, wide, certain, the one that had never reached anywhere near his eyes. But underneath it, something else was present today, something with edges. "Congratulations," he said, loud enough for the floor to hear, the chairman's new favorite. Zarelle zipped her bag. "Have a good morning, Desak." "Tell me something," he said, and his voice dropped slightly, not quieter, but thicker, the way voices get when the performance slips and something realer pushes through. "Did you tell him about the reports?" She looked at him steadily. He already knew. The smile held, but something behind it recalculated. She picked up her bag and walked to the elevator without looking back. What she did not know, what she would not know for another 72 hours, was that Desak had already moved. He had spent the weekend preparing, not panicking. Desak was too strategic for panic, but constructing. He had gone back through 18 months of contract files and found one that Zarelle had drafted on his instruction, a vendor agreement with a subsidiary firm that contained, when he finished adjusting it, a clause that implicated her in an unauthorized data sharing arrangement. The alteration was subtle, professionally done, the kind of thing that required both access and intelligence to construct, which told you everything about how long he had been waiting for a reason to use it. He submitted the altered file to the compliance department on Monday afternoon, 3 hours after Zarelle's reassignment was announced. He attached a formal note expressing concern about irregularities he had discovered in the work of a former team member. He sent it with the confidence of a man who had always survived by ensuring someone else was standing closer to the fire. Zarelle spent Monday afternoon in a briefing with Tarian's senior strategy team, 3 of them, sharp and efficient, walking her through the parameters of the analysis project she would be leading. It was complex work, the kind that required the full engagement of every analytical skill she had spent 2 years quietly developing in a cubicle while someone else collected the credit. She felt something loosen in her chest as she worked, the specific relief of a person given room proportionate to their actual capacity. Tarian was present for the final 40 minutes of the briefing. He sat at the head of the table and asked 3 questions, each one arriving at exactly the place the previous conversation had been circling without landing. She watched him and thought, he does this with everything, finds the center of it directly. That evening, Leora called. "Tell me everything," she said, before Zarelle had finished saying hello. "He reassigned me to his direct office." A silence, then, "Zarelle, I know. He heard you sing and then pulled your entire work history and then moved you to his floor. It's a professional reassignment, Leora. It is absolutely not only a professional reassignment, and you know it. I don't know anything, and I'm not going to assume anything. He saw talent being wasted. He made a business decision. He asked about your song. You told me he asked specifically about your song. Good night, Leora. I'm just saying, good night." She hung up.
She sat in her small apartment and looked at the city lights through the rooftop window and did not let herself think about the way he had said, "It showed," standing at his window with his back to her, saying it quietly, almost to himself, like a fact he was acknowledging rather than a compliment he was offering. She did not think about it at all. She was very disciplined about not thinking about it. The compliance investigation notice arrived on Wednesday morning. It appeared in her inbox at 8:47, a formal notification from the Daesung Group Compliance Department informing her that a concern had been raised regarding contract documentation from her time on Team B and requesting her presence for a review meeting on Friday afternoon. She read it once, twice, the third time slowly, parsing each word with the cold precision of someone whose first instinct in a crisis had always been to understand exactly what she was facing before she responded. Then she printed it, put it in a folder, and went to her 9 o'clock briefing without mentioning it to anyone. She would handle it. She always handled things. What she had not factored, what she could not have factored because it required knowing things about Seo Terrian she did not yet know, was that Terrian's compliance department reported directly to him, that every formal investigation notice generated in that department landed simultaneously in a secondary review log that Jae-won screened each morning, that by 9:15 Terrian already knew. By 10 o'clock, he had pulled the original contract file. By 10:45, he had identified the alteration. It was, he would say later to his legal director, almost impressive in its construction. Almost. The kind of work that might have survived scrutiny from someone less precise. But the metadata on the document told a story the content was trying to conceal. The file had been accessed and modified 4 days ago from Desak's credentials at 11:17 on a Saturday night. Terrian called his legal director, then his HR director, then Jae-won with the single instruction: "Get Yeon Desak to the 38th floor boardroom, 1 o'clock. He paused. "And tell him to bring his access card. He won't be needing it after today." Zarelle was in the middle of a data analysis when Leora sent her a message at 1:17 that simply read, "Something is happening on the 38th floor. I'm near the boardroom corridor. Desak just went in. He does not look comfortable." She stared at the message. Then a second one, 4 minutes later. "He just came out. He is holding a box. Zarelle, he is holding a box." She put her phone down, returned to her screen, but her hands had gone very still. She found the details from Jae-won that evening, delivered in the precise, neutral tone of a man relaying information as a professional courtesy. The compliance filing had been reviewed, the alteration had been identified and documented, Yeon Desak had been terminated effective immediately, his access revoked, a formal legal notice issued. The compliance concern against Zarelle was closed, not suspended, not pending further review, but closed, with a formal notation that the filing was without merit. The chairman wanted you to know directly, before it appears in the formal communication tomorrow. Zarelle sat with that for a moment. "Thank you," she said carefully. "Please thank the chairman." She went home. She stood in her kitchen and gripped the counter with both hands and breathed. Not crying, she had decided long ago that Desak was not worth her tears, but something releasing, the particular physical relief of a threat that has passed, leaving the body to process what the mind was too focused to feel while it was happening. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Miss Adebayo," Terrian's voice. She straightened instinctively. "Chairman, the situation has been resolved." A pause. "I want to be certain you understand. The compliance filing was false. It is closed. It will not appear on any internal record associated with your name." Jae-won told me. "Thank you, truly." A brief silence on the line. Then he said, with a slight shift in tone, not warmer exactly, but less formal, as though he had made a small internal decision, "Are you all right?" She opened her mouth to say yes automatically, the word was already formed, and then something about the directness of the question, the absence of performance in it, the fact that he had called her himself instead of having Jae-won relay the message, stopped her. "I will be," she said instead. "Good," he said, and then quietly, "Go home, Miss Adebayo. The work will be there tomorrow." The line ended. She looked at her phone for a long time in the kitchen of her small apartment, the city noise rising from the street below, the familiar comfort of her carefully constructed ordinary life surrounding her. And for the first time in 2 years, ordinary felt slightly too small. 3 weeks later, she received a notice from her building management. Her lease would not be renewed. The building had been acquired by a private investment group. Residents had 60 days to vacate. She read the notice on a Thursday evening and felt the specific exhaustion of a person who has fought too many battles and is looking at the beginning of another one. She sat on her rooftop at dusk with the notice in her hand and looked at Seoul spreading out in every direction, all its light and noise and motion, and thought with a quiet bitterness, of course. The next morning, Tarian appeared at her office at 8:15. He was carrying a document folder. He set it on her desk and stepped back. "What is this?" she asked. "The lease on your building has been transferred. The new ownership has extended all current tenant contracts for a minimum of 3 years at existing rates." She stared at the folder, then at him. "You bought my building," she said. "You bought the building," he confirmed. "Tarian," she stopped. It was the first time she had used his name without the title, and neither of